you're looking to buy a cross-country race bike today, you're going to face a difficult decision. Do you go for the lightweight, razor-sharp hardtail, or do you go for the heavier but better handling full suspension bike? This is partly to do with World Cup racing. The tracks are getting more and more technical, so the bikes need to meet these demands. So with that in mind, I wanted to find out which was faster if you could only have one bike, a hardtail or a full suspension. So while this test is in no way scientific, we have tried to use a procedure to make this as accurate as possible, and hopefully it should give you some idea over which bike could be fastest for you. If you'd like to know more about our testing methodology, click above or look for the link in the video description. Scott were kind enough to provide us with two of their top spec 27.5 race bikes, the Hardtail Scale 700RC and the full suspension Spark 700RC. They were perfect for the test, as bar the obvious differences in suspension design are almost identical in terms of spec. The Spark weighed in at 10.29 kilograms and the Scale a feathery 8.8 kilograms, both very competitive for their class. The final piece of the equipment puzzle, and probably the most important, was a power meter from Quark. The Quark power meter would be vital for our test, as I could keep my effort level, or suffering, consistent and look back over the data when finished. To make the test as fair as possible, we needed to try and control the variables. Each bike had the same saddle height, suspension setup and tyre pressure. I used the same power meter on each bike, swapping it between the bikes and recalibrating before each lap. We used the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire as our test location, as it provided a good mix of terrain and features. We chose two different courses that offered two distinct riding challenges over which to do our laps. We called the first lap the Rooty Lap, containing a good mix of fire road, tight twisting single track, routes, a small rock garden and some short climbs. The second lap was called the Rough Lap, containing a longer fire road climb followed by a steep technical descent with rocks, drops and small jumps. The testing began on the Rooty Lap with a couple of slow sighting circuits on each bike to scope out the terrain. Then, once familiar with the course, I did a full pace lap on each bike with at least 40 minutes rest between efforts. I then repeated this procedure on the Rough Lap, but this time swapped the order of which bike went first. Pacing was of course an issue, and I tried to ride the laps just under race pace to ensure I wasn't too tired at the end and that all my efforts were as close as possible to being equal. We've put the results into this simple table which shows the overall time and normalised power for each lap, then the percentage differences between the bikes. We also broke down the climb and descent on the Rough Lap into separate sections for a closer analysis. So in conclusion, looking at the Rooty Lap first, the thing that really struck me was that the hardtail was faster, but not only was it faster for less power. This means I went quicker and didn't have to try as hard. That's kind of like the gold standard for anyone in any kind of racing, the fact that you're going quicker and not having to try as hard. So on the Rooty Lap, it seems like the hardtail for me came out as a clear winner. And then on the Rough Lap, things start to look a bit more complicated. The full suspension was faster overall, but it required more power. Whether or not you can keep that power going throughout the whole race, we'll never know, but it's an interesting consideration. I then broke the Rough Lap down into two sections. There was the climbing section and the descending section. On the climbing section, both bikes were within 0.41 seconds of each other, so incredibly close in terms of time. But once again, I had to try a lot harder on the full suspension bike because it's heavier. So weight when you're climbing, obviously, as everyone knows, is a very important thing. But then when you move on to the descent, the full suspension bike really shone there. It was 11.5 seconds faster, but it was 11.5 seconds faster for less power. That's really important, and for a racer, it's something they'd bite your hand off for. I really felt that result on the day because when I got to the bottom of the descent on the hardtail, my arms were in bits, I was making more mistakes, and with the full suspension, I felt much more in control and made less mistakes. So over the course of the race, that kind of feeling of fatigue would only be amplified on the hardtail. But then again, whether or not You make up the time lost on the descent on the climb each lap because you're that much faster on the hardtail. Very difficult to say. Another consideration is the weight of you. I'm pretty light, I'm 63 kilos, so any kind of weight added to the bike is a big percentage for me to carry relative to my body weight. Whereas if you get an 80 kilo rider, huge legs, a lot of power, adding a kilo or 500 grams onto their bike and the power they can produce isn't that much. Bigger riders find full suspension bikes a lot better. If you look at the World Cup, guys like Cool Harvey, really good on a full suspension bike. Some guys like Schurter, they're very good on full suspension bikes, but then they're also really good on a hardtail because they're a lot lighter. For the amateur racer, budget is also very important. I rode two really high-end bikes, so the full suspension bike was really competitive. 10.29 kilos is incredibly light for a full suspension, and it was also incredibly expensive. At the kind of mid-price point, these full suspension bikes are quite a bit heavier than the mid-price point hardtail. So again, if you're looking at budgets around the mid-price point, £2,000 to £2,500, hardtail could be a really good idea because it's still pretty light, whereas a full suspension bike, you're getting up to kind of 12 kilos, 13 kilo territory. You can be really missing out on a lot of free speed there compared to someone on the hardtail. So to answer the question, which one is fastest? I guess there is no clear answer, but there are things you can draw from these results which might help you when making a buying decision. If you really like the descending, you're a bit heavier, you've got a lot of power, then maybe the full suspension will suit you more. You can really make up time on those descents, save your arms, and you've got enough power to just maybe stay with the lighter hardtail riders on the climbs. Whereas if you're super light, you haven't got much power, you rely on that light weight to get you up the hills. Having the lighter hardtail bike could still be the one for you. So for me, being a really light rider, it's still going to be the hardtail, but it's getting closer and closer every year, and I can't see it being long until I could find myself on a full suspension bike.